It's the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, episode 34. You're someone who is well acquainted with the skill of capturing. In other words, you know that it's important to write everything down that's important. You know better than to keep it all in your head. That's a basic productivity lesson. But lately, you've noticed that the number of things you need to write down or capture has exploded. It seems as if it's just like the other day when a post it note was enough. And now you're writing everything down in something like a notebook or maybe on your phone, and you feel as if you can't catch up. What's wrong? What else should you be doing? Tune into this episode to hear from me and my special guest, Brad Aeon, as we solve this wicked task management problem together. I'm Francis Wade, and welcome to the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast. And welcome back. And as you can see, we are joined on our podcast by Dr. Brad Aeon. And before I introduce Brad, let me just tell you a little bit about this particular format, because you probably have not been on a podcast like this one before, unless you've heard one of our prior episodes. So things are a bit different. We're actually here to solve a very difficult problem. So I've invited Brad to join me in my virtual office. I'm in Jamaica and he's in Montreal. Montreal, right, Brad?
That's correct, yes.
We're far away from each other, but we're going to act as if we are together, putting our best thinking towards the solution of the problem that I introduced in the introduction. So this isn't an interview, and I'm not going to ask Brad what his favorite book is and what his favorite pet and colors. No, we're putting our heads together to try to give you some insight as the listener to a problem that many, if not most, or maybe all of us have to some degree. And what we're going to do is hack away at the problem, spend most of the time diagnosing it. And then as we diagnose it, you'll start to hear solutions based on the conversation that we're having. Because what we're trying to do is have some unique insights, generate some kind of serendipitous moments. And if we have one of those, I'll put a bell in. You probably hear a bell, as these serendipitous moments take place. If we get to the end of the podcast and there's no serendipity, I'll put in a buzzer. Time out. I don't know. But, this is really inspired by something Einstein said, that he had an hour to solve a problem. He'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So here we are. So let me tell you a quick story and then I'll introduce Brad. Karen has lots of ideas. Plus, people admire her way of always writing everything down. Whenever she has one of her good insights, she's quick to put it in one of her blue notebooks. She has one at home, one for her car, and another at work. She writes down great notes from meetings, in-person and virtual meetings. And people know she's the only one who has notes from meetings and get-togethers from over a year ago. She even has 7 notebooks. These are prior notebooks that are completely filled up to the last page with notes. They're sitting on her desk at home. So she's been doing this for a while. And there are some good things in them, right? For sure. That's why she's not throwing them away, all 7. But guess what? Lately, she's been feeling a bit overwhelmed. More than a few times, she's looked for notes in the wrong notebook. She can't recall which one she last used. So some critical tasks are slipping through the cracks. It's produced a few embarrassments in meetings when tasks she was assigned were not completed. They were written down, but they got lost in deep pages of detailed notes. So even though she's trying harder to keep perfect notes, this approach isn't working. So Dr. Brad Aeon is a time management researcher who specializes in the dynamics of time, combining sociology, anthropology, psychology, history, and philosophy. His expertise extends beyond academia, with a TED Talk, and features in major media like the BBC News and The Guardian. Brad actively collaborates with various organizations offering tailored time management and productivity training. He also founded a startup providing evidence-based training to enhance team productivity, well-being, and work-life balance. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to have you. We've had you be at a couple of our conferences, and it was awesome having you. And um, that's, I guess, forms the basis for why we're inviting you today, because giving us some decent insights before probably means you'll give us some today. But no pressure, right?
No, so well, thank you. It's always a pleasure, really.
Great, 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 great. So, what do you think of Karen? Have you met a Karen before, and what do you think of people like that?
To be fully honest, I wish I wish I had met more Karens. The reality is that, like, even though her her approach might not be optimal, um, the vast majority of people I know do not even get there. Meaning that they don't even have one notebook, let alone many notebooks to offload their thoughts, their ideas, their brainstorming notes, and I think uh, that's a shame because we live in an age of cognitive overload, and we don't even realize it. Like if you think about the average person around the ninth or the 10th century, or even the 12th century.
Hmm.
Imagine you're in Western Europe, somewhere like France or Germany, and you're not a king, you're not a prince, you're just like a regular person. Now imagine your day-to-day life. You're not going to be exposed to a lot of information. You don't see billboards, you don't see magazines, you don't get no emails, no text messages. Um, you don't have to deal with phone calls. The most information you're gonna be exposed to is the village's gossip. Like maybe your cousin has a new cow, and that's the news of the day. And assuming you were literate, assuming you know how to read, maybe the one of the books you're going to be exposed to is the Bible, and that's about it. Now compare that to today. We live in truly unprecedented times historically. Like you wake up, for most people I know, they wake up, first thing they do is reach for their smartphone, then look at their emails, maybe look at the news, and already you've consumed probably more novel information than someone in the 15th century by the time, by 8 a.m. or by 9 a.m.
And Karens of the world, you said you wish there were more of them, because most of us are consuming, but we don't do anything with what we consume, right?
That's right. There's I think, I know this is about time management, but I think in the 21st century, the foundation of time management should be information management. Because you're right, we consume a lot of information. The way we organize it might not always be smart, if that makes sense.
Well, it's hard to say, right? Because it's hard to sort of point fingers at us, I would say, because we're not trained to operate in the world that we're living in. We're not expected to. We're more like Karen. Karen probably didn't even have a writing implement. That probably even came later, when pencils and bits of lead were crafted, and paper became more of a thing that you had. And then literacy, so she had several obstacles to doing what we do today.
Yes.
But she learned, and most people, I guess, train themselves to write. They have to have been through some intervention, because it doesn't come naturally to do that.
Mhm. Yes.
So something happened, and they decided, okay, I'm going to be someone who writes everything down.
Yeah.
And these people are, I agree with you, these people are very rare, and they're very effective compared to the people who write nothing down, who try to
Yes.
remember everything, because they get themselves in all kinds of trouble, right?
Absolutely. Some people, you said it doesn't come naturally to us. That's absolutely true. Sometimes we do have like a reflex when we're in the kitchen and we want to remember to buy some milk. We just stick a post-it note to the fridge saying, remember to buy the milk, or remember dentist appointment. But that's about it. I think it certainly doesn't come to us naturally. And there's, it's I think, like you said, it could be illiteracy. It could be applied to any skill, really.
Right.
When you train yourself to do it, it becomes a lot easier. But I think that the default for most people is really try to keep everything in the back of your mind. Um, and our minds
Karens
are
are better,
thinking brains. Yeah, exactly.
but still, Karen has a problem. So as we're, probably the audience that we're getting are people who already know about capturing, right? They've already been through getting things done, or they've been exposed to some philosophy that in which they are already capturing. This is not a brand new, and if it is, this might not be the episode for them, but there's other episodes that I could listen to. But the idea is that you capture by writing or typing or voice recording, or if you have a useful, secretary, admin, aide de camp or something, you have someone you can give instructions to, and they keep everything in their head or they write them down for you. But the point is that everything important is recorded somehow, and it's not left just to memory and some recall and
Yeah.
random triggers and whatnot. But most people, I think, listening to our podcast, they know this practice, and it's been recommended, and they probably recommend it to others. But Karen Karen's practice of writing everything down does not match the world that she lives in any longer.
Hmm.
And she, by virtue of writing everything down, she gets overwhelmed and she's feeling buried. And it used to work, but it's no longer working. And I would say that we all have to go through some kind of a phase of a Karen phase, I think, in our productivity journeys. Like at some point we learned, and some point we tried, and some point we probably decided, but then the Karens didn't adjust the way the rest of us did. The Karens sort of, had the initial success and then just kept writing everything down. But what happened if if she doesn't make the adjustment at some point in the future? What will her future look like, Brad? Do you think?
I think there's two main problems. The first one is the hoarding problem. Maybe you've heard of people that have a hoarding issue where
Like that TV show, Hoarders?
exactly, yes, compulsively they're going to keep everything, regardless of whether it's useful, important, or even still usable. So they would keep like old pieces of I don't know, newspapers, old gadgets, old pens that don't even work anymore. They want to keep everything in their house.
And some of those, you never know.
Well, as long as it doesn't become an issue where your house is so cluttered that you can't even find what you need anymore, or you can't even, sometimes in extreme cases, you can't even walk within your apartment because literally there's no space anymore because you've been hoarding for 40 years or 50 years.
You're filled to the brim with pens.
Yes.
So Karen could be a hoarder of, I guess, information in this case, right? Not physical objects, but a hoarder of data,
That's right. And I think
data
that's not
hog
even,
of some kind.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's not even the most common problem. I think to get to that level, you would have to be very, very systematic in the way you capture data. I know very few people who do that systematically, because to get to a point where you have so much information that's captured that it becomes a hoarding issue, it means that you do it very consistently, very frequently. And I don't think that I think there's very few people in that category. I think the main problem is that people like Karen capture a lot of information, but they don't make the time to implement it. Because the very purpose of capturing information is that at some point in your life, if not now, maybe later, it is going to be useful. It is going to be implemented. Maybe you have a thought about a potential side gig or a business or something to fix the way you currently work. But if it's just stored somewhere and you never look into it, then for all intents and purposes, it becomes useless.
So Karen's overwhelm comes from a feeling of probably underlining the hoarding and the feeling as if I'm going to miss out, a fear of missing out in the future, I guess.
Yes.
There is an underlying fear. And I guess, unfortunately, she can never capture enough to have the fear go away.
Yes,
So,
and in fact, it becomes a vicious cycle, because
uh-huh.
as you capture more things, compared to the average person who doesn't
Hmm.
capture anything, The average
Mm-hmm.
person forgets, like sometimes has good ideas and then forgets about them. But people like Karen has good ideas, captures them,
Mm-hmm.
and then becomes more and more aware of the many, many things she could be doing. And that creates a sense of uh,
Anxiety.
anxiety, overwhelmed, like you put it,
Mm-hmm.
because we become more aware of what we could or should be doing rather than
Mm-hmm.
just forgetting about them.
So this is the weird thing, I guess. You're saying that the capturing doesn't, at her level, it stops reducing the anxiety and it actually increases it. So
Yes,
it's her capturing doesn't scale, in other words.
yes, because there's a growing disconnect between what you can do, your day-to-day capacity, and what you could be doing. And this actually happened to a friend of mine uh, 2 years
Really?
ago, because he's the CEO of a very uh, very not powerful, very successful company in Canada, and he asked me about exactly that, like how can I better capture information. And I recommended at the time what worked best. What worked best for him was Notion,
Hmm?
and it's an app where you can capture literally everything. And 2 months later, he sent me a link to one of his Notion pages where he had a list of movies he wanted to watch, and another one, a list of articles that he wanted to read, articles from the media, articles from like research. And he told me it became an issue because it makes him realize more and more that there's so many things that he could be doing, like all the articles to read, all the movies to watch, and so little time. And so it just makes I guess for some people, it makes us more aware of what we're missing out on every day.
Wow. Oh, I never had that thought. I never realized that and had that thought before, but I can see it now that we're distinguishing it. Maybe it should be our first insight that capturing too much increases anxiety, and it's meant to save you from anxiety and to take things off your mind and give you peace of mind. And then you, as a Karen, you take it to the next level, and it gets much worse.
Yes.
Wow.
So it's interesting you mentioned this, because just yesterday a colleague of mine sent me this very recent study on the concept of choice overload. So you know how you go to the grocery store and
Oh
you want to
yeah.
buy a box of cereal. Uh,
Yeah.
if there's maybe two or three of them, it's easy for you to pick the one that you like best. But if
Right.
like in Walmart in the United States, there's literally like hundreds of potential brands of cereal. Sometimes we just like we have this paralysis. It's called analysis paralysis, where there's so much choice. The selection is so wide that you can't even start to think about, okay, what do I pick?
So you
And
then walk out without any cereal because you're overwhelmed by all the. I've heard this story of folks who have moved to the U.S. and walk into a grocery store for the first time, and their mind explodes,
yes,
and they have to run. They have to, or even people who, even Americans who have lived abroad and come back to the U.S. and they walk into, like you said, the Walmart or super, what's the super Walmart called? Mega
uh,
Walmart, something like
super
that.
center. Oh yeah, I
Sam's
think it's
Club.
Sam's Club. Yes,
Yeah. The mega ones, and they
yes,
go into one of those, and all of a sudden they're like, boom, because they're used to three boxes of cereal, not 500,
yes.
and
It,
they
it's
end up
it's
in
a very
analysis
wild.
paralysis.
And it's especially, I think you're right, when you compare it across countries. I'd spent a few months in South Africa once, and after that, going straight to Boston, Massachusetts. And I was at a gas station, um, and in the gas station, you have the store. The store alone had more options than everything I'd seen in the previous months in any store in South Africa. Like you want some Gatorade or some Mountain Dew, there's 9 different flavors just for that. And the same applies to information. Like when people gather and gather and gather, like, oh, I could be working on this project, I could be watching this movie. Then when you go back and you look at your notes, you realize, oh my God, I only have 24 hours in a day. And yet, all these things that I could be doing. And it creates a sense of, like you said, overwhelm, anxiety, but also a sense of time pressure. Because, when people say, I don't have time, or I feel like I don't have time, it's not always objective. It's about the subjective perception of it. And what we see consistently around the world is that, believe it or not, the people that feel the most pressed for time are the people that could afford to work less, like people that are highly educated, people that make a lot of money. Those are the ones that are consistently pressed for time. And it's not just about work, it's also because in their cultural preferences, they want to go to the theater, they want to go to the movies, they want to go to this ballet, they want to go do this, piano lessons. So because of all the things that they could do, they could be doing, it creates this sense of urgency. So many things I can do, and yet so little time.
So it's not analysis paralysis in the traditional sense. This because each of the things that Karen has captured are meaningful to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that there's too many things that she's captured. So it's almost like self-assignment analysis paralysis, because she's kind of assigned these things to herself and said, oh, these are things I want to do. So she's routinely assigning 100 hours of stuff to a 40-hour week, or 300 years of stuff to a 70-year life.
Yeah.
If you want to blow it up. And feeling the time pressure and probably thinking that it's not her fault.
It's never, for most people, it's never our fault. That's the thing that a lot of people. So when I started doing research on time management, I felt a bit like I almost never wanted to bring this up in public, because I felt that people would feel attacked. That very often, especially in the West, especially if you're not wealthy, but at least middle class, usually when you don't have time, a good part of it is because of your choices. And obviously no one wants to hear that.
So you better whisper that next time.
Yes.
There are people listening to the podcast. Okay. Clicking it off, turn it off, pause. swiping it right now, because you just said something that, say it again really slow, so that those who want to hear can hear.
Well, that's the reality. There's research on this, on the self-imposed time pressure, self-imposed paralysis, analysis paralysis, and it's. I don't think it's a bad thing. Like being honest with ourselves is, to me, the first step towards making better decisions. To give you a personal example, when I was doing my PhD, I wasn't making a lot of money. I was making very, very little money, and so I decided to start using this app that tracks my expenses down to the cent. And for a whole year, I did that. And then I realized that over a whole year, I think I had spent $1,700 on pizza slices. There's a pizza joint near the university, and I would go there like multiple times a week. And just to give you a sense of perspective, that amount of money was more than 10% my annual income. Obviously, that's not something that's great when you realize it. You're like, oh my God, what have I done? That is absolutely ill-advised. But it was the first step towards better budgeting, towards more, I guess, rational, more reasonable use of my money.
Healthier eating, for that matter.
Also that too, absolutely. There are some harsh truths about ourselves. No one is perfect, and I think recognizing that and being honest with ourselves makes for good time management and good decisions in general.
Yeah, some smart person could say 1,700 slices, huh? And then they'll add up all of the cheese on all those slices and show you that you ate 45 cubic feet of cheese in
yes,
a year.
That is a lot.
Which point you never eat pizza again for the rest of your life.
That is
the point I'm making with that is that if Karen had feedback when she added these bits of information to her books, if there was something that could read, you just added 25 minutes. or this is going to take you 3 hours to read. And congratulations, you've now added 40 more hours of reading to your day at the end of a day if it did that. Can you imagine what her reaction would be? She would be like, oh, I don't need to capture all of this. Actually, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I don't, it would give her, the immediate feedback would give her some reality check.
Yes.
So it would temper her sort of, I didn't want to say anal, but her compulsion to capture everything.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that, this reminds me of a feeling I had just yesterday. I went into YouTube and I found this history channel, right? And I've listened to one of them. And I looked at yesterday. I was looking through all of the cool videos, history videos that they have in this channel. Each of them is like an hour long. So I can spend the rest of my life watching these videos. There's so many of them, right?
Yeah.
I started to feel just that what you mentioned, that feeling of overwhelm, that I really like these history videos and I think I should listen to them because I become a better person. But I'm on the verge of doing what Karen does, which is assigning myself an overwhelming task that I can never complete because I can never watch all the history videos on YouTube. I don't have enough life left to do it. And there's people adding them faster than I can view them.
Yes.
So I guess I've forced myself to rationalize and say no. But it happened really quickly. And I imagine there's many people who are listening right now who have had to do the same. But there's the places where, like, for example, for Karen, where she's not done that yet. And the anxiety is only increasing.
Yes.
Because as you said, she's like the cause of it. It's her choices. But in her mind, it's not like she's making conscious choices where she gets feedback each time she writes something down.
That's right. And I think that's where maybe a concept that would help here is the concept of signal to noise ratio. And essentially means whenever you, this is actually very relevant because it is about information processing. When you're trying to capture information, you want to reduce the noise, so irrelevant or not super useful information, to prioritize the signal, so useful information. When I used to do the thing when I was in my teenage years where I would compulsively save every article that I find interesting. Then you end up with a huge collection of articles that may or may not be interesting.
Was that pre-internet days or was that?
that was when RSS feeds became popular.
I like those. So many people who are listening. Those were.
They are great. I still use them, but the compulsion to save like every potentially interesting article, I've increased my signal to noise ratio by only. Now what I do is I only save things that are really, really groundbreaking, interesting, that I think would be worth revisiting at some point. So I used to save maybe 10, 12 articles a day. Now I'm at maybe one a week.
Okay. We're getting a little more into solutions though. We're really in the diagnostic part. So hold that thought for when we get to solutions because we'll come back with it. I think we'll go deeper with it. But so Karen is an anxiety, unfortunately putting herself in more anxiety, and she thinks she's being productive. And everyone in her office thinks she's productive. But in fact, she's giving herself more anxiety, and it's a function of the behaviors. Maybe that's why it's so difficult to solve this problem if you have it, because it appears to be productive. It's more productive than the other guy, but ultimately it's not a winning strategy in today's world because there's too many things that we have to try to keep track of.
That's right.
It needs another intervention in order to keep it productive. Otherwise, it will become unproductive.
Absolutely. I think for something to be productive, it has to lead to outcomes, to desired outcomes. In that sense, just merely doing something is not productive in my definition. Like, for instance, if someone is constantly checking their emails, responding to emails, but not actually focusing on their main job, to me, that's not being productive, because the ultimate outcome that you want, which is to do a good quality quality job, that's not being done. What you're doing is just tending to responding to emails that may or may not be important. And the same thing with Karen. Noting down every minute
Mm-hmm.
aspect that
Mm-hmm.
of daily life, or things that you may be thinking about. That's not productive if ultimately what you want is to act on important ideas that are potentially going
Mm-hmm.
to change your life for the better.
Mm-hmm. That almost says that if a Karen is over focused on one kind of productivity, then she'll eventually create a problem, an overall problem. And I think that's true for all of us because we don't have standard measures of productivity. It's easy for us to focus on the one, like replying to email
Mhm.
quickly. And there are some people who specialize in that. In their office, they're the guy who replies to their email within 5 minutes every time, no matter what, right? And you wonder, how the heck do they get anything done? Well, the answer is they don't. Their job in their mind is to respond to email. So we don't have a sort of a balanced set of metrics to tell us how we're being productive. We have insights that people have derived, like Karen, the person who answers email, but we don't have like a dashboard that tells us here's how we're doing overall. And yeah, we're capturing, but guess what? We just captured 500 hours of tasks, and we can't do them. We
Mhm.
don't have anything telling us that we're creating a problem for ourselves, so we don't have any feedback. So that seems to me a big drawback. We don't have a sense of what a productive person is like in a kind of I would say general sense. Is that how does that fit with your
That makes
thinking?
a lot of sense. I think that there's ways maybe to approximate it. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
goal in life is to start this yoga business. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can establish a few milestones, like
Mm-hmm.
by next month, I want to incorporate my business. Then after that, I want
Mm-hmm.
to start advertising. So maybe create 5 marketing campaigns. Then by month 6, I want to have at least 20 clients a month. So there's ways you can quantify that. And that's the basis of goal setting theory. And the reality is that it works, and the reality is that it's
Mm-hmm.
very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, I think, focus on the wrong metrics,
Mm-hmm.
because they're usually a lot easier and they're less abstract. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, for instance, you know that success in your business means signing up more clients. That
Mm-hmm.
means you have to reflect on that. That means you have to reflect on what would be a realistic yet challenging way to measure that. Like, number of clients, how many do I want? 20 a month. Is that realistic? Is that feasible?
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot more, I guess, reflection and cognitive energy than say, okay, I'm going to respond to 30 emails today and then feel good about it.
Yeah, because people we're more on in our personal life. So I could see the business example because there's lots of examples of business, and you can be taught the business example because there are people who will teach it. But on the personal productivity side, it's all kind of smoke mirrors, guessing. You don't have the tools. When she captures into her notebook, it doesn't measure anything. Even if she captured into her phone, there's no decent capturing. I've never seen a capturing app that says, "Oh, look, you're capturing too much." Your
Yes.
filter. You need to filter some of this down, like an AI that says, "We think there's something wrong with the way you're capturing because," and it explains it to you. There's nothing like that, right?
Yeah.
And to discover that, if you don't have a coach to sit down with every week, or if you don't have a structured way of reviewing your performance, you would never discover it, right?
No, for sure. And I think the problem when people do that is that they're too focused on the input side of things. So how many bits of information do I capture versus the output side of things, which is how many important, useful actions or outcomes
So I
have
get from it.
resulted from these information capture activities. So input is very easy to measure. Like you said,
Right.
how many thoughts, how many ideas have I noted down today? That's easy. Anyone can come up with ideas and note them down. That's the input side of things. That's not productivity. Productivity is if you really want to be technical about it, it's the ratio of input to output, or output to input rather. And so if your input is very high and your output is very low, then by definition, you're not being very productive. However, for the same input, if you increase the amount of output, so like based on that information, you created that yoga business, you signed up a lot of clients, then your productivity increases.
Well, because this flies in the face of, I would say, some of the conventional wisdom, which is that you capture everything. There is a thought that you leave nothing uncaptured because it would prey on your mind. I don't know how to resolve that other than to say that it's good advice when you're not capturing. But if you're a Karen, to say, oh, you should capture some more. We're now talking further overwhelmed because that's what got her into trouble. So it's a different kind of advice for a different kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
That's more suitable for someone who's already skilled at capturing, now needs another kind of advice, a different kind of analysis, a different diagnosis.
Yeah.
To continue to be effective.
For sure. But I think that for everyone, the root of the problem is not so much how much you capture, how much you don't capture. I would agree with you. It is usually better to capture as much as possible because you don't want them to be nagging, to have that nagging voice in the back of your mind telling you, oh, I'm still thinking about this. I'm still thinking about this. I think that people like Karen do not really have that problem because by definition, they're offloading everything. And I think that's good. I think the problem arises when you have a huge chunk of information that's just waiting to be acted upon, and it's not being acted upon. So
those notebooks.
Yes. Yeah. And that's just a constant reminder of everything that's left undone.
Right. So Karen, if we don't solve this problem for her, this is gonna be a continual source as long as she stays working and active and sentient and all the rest of it. It's not gonna get any better, and the anxiety might cause her to dig a deeper hole even. What does someone like a Karen typically do to try to fix the problem? Do they try to capture more because they think that's let me try to be more disciplined? And these kind of people who take minutes in meetings without being asked to take minutes. And you're wondering, why are they taking minutes? And it's more that sort of compulsion. I wonder if that's what they do. Or if they catch themselves, what do they then do? They try not to capture everything? Or do they keep capturing everything? Or do they... Hopefully they would do what you said, which is kind of like figure out that I'll sort it out when I sort it out. Which of those solutions do they apply?
That's a very good question. I think it assumes that people like Karen will realize that their way of operating is a problem. The reality is that I feel like most people don't see it as a problem, whether in academia or in businesses. I've seen people compulsively note down things where I'm like, you don't need to note that down. Just be there, be present. It doesn't really matter whether you take that down or not. So I assume this is some kind of personality trait where everything needs to be somewhere, and that's fine. But at some point, I think we need that kind of self-awareness when we do realize it's an issue, and it's not specific to information capture. Like we all have, most human beings have issues that they're not even aware of, whether that's maybe drinking a little too much or eating a little too much or being stuck in a rut. It's all kinds of problems that we don't see because we're like a goldfish in a bowl, and we don't realize that the water around us is not good for us because it's our environment, it's our day-to-day environment, and we take it for granted.
Right. Being driven by some kind of fear or insecurity or um, feeling of being less than or something from the past.
Yeah.
I know someone who was a Karen and she had the three notebooks, and the story that I told is a version of what I saw her doing. And I think there may have been a time in the past where she didn't write something down and it proved to be very costly. So being driven by some past failure,
Yeah.
and that had that effect. The person was extremely accomplished also. This was a person actually ran a company, a successful company. And then there was this like tick, that uh, she demonstrated that was like, okay, that's a different kind of behavior. Never seen anyone do that, but it was kind of like that. But the sense I had was that it came from not a healthy place, and maybe if there's getting to like, okay, what happened that drives that behavior today, and getting to the source of it, maybe
Mhm.
like in a therapeutic kind of relationship, could lead to some freedom as opposed to the compulsion that I thought I noticed. What do you think?
For sure. I would say that 20% of people that come to me with time management issues, in reality, have issues that would be better solved through therapy. Whether it's procrastination, whether it's a lot of things that, like you said, are due to much deeper seated problems than just a time management issue. Uh,
Mm,
and you're right in saying that because these are deeper issues, they might escape our conscious attention. And so we don't see them as problem. It's just the way we live, the way we've been living for the past 20, 30, or 40 years. Um, and I think one way to realize that is just seeking external feedback, or when you realize that something is not making you happy, maybe uh, take that extremely important first step of trying to look into it further than just dismissing it as, oh well, that's just the way I am, because the way I am is not necessarily a good thing. It's
mm,
I see it as something to be constantly improved.
mm. Well, maybe that's our second insight. The 20% of folks would have a therapeutic issue. The 20% have a something that's resolved in therapy, as opposed to something involved by a new way of processing information.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
if the therapeutic issue isn't addressed, then it would overwhelm any solution that of a practical nature because of the origin of the whole thing. So it's not like they could take a course and then learn a different way of doing it, or do some process change and some new technology.
That's
Um,
correct. Yes.
um, but for the 80%, so let's say that there's not a therapeutic issue. Um, do you think that there's a model of data that they're missing? Most of the Karens are missing about what constitutes most effective information to be captured. Do you think there's a rule of thumb in there? Because they
So
tend
Brad,
to they tend to write anything down that's assigned to them, assigned to the other person, anything, any factoid
yeah.
that's of interest, any nice statistic, any quote, any URL, anything. They're kind of busy like making sure that nothing slips through the cracks. Maybe it's again that fear of missing out, but there doesn't seem to be any filtering happening on the front end. It just seems to be like a dump of everything that they've heard that seems somewhat, the bar is low, in other words. Anything that exceeds the bar gets put into the notebook. But is there a way to apply a filter or to raise the bar? Do you think that would give them some more accuracy or more
So
efficiency?
um, have you ever cooked green peas?
I can cook a few things. Green peas. Yeah, you may have me there. I'm not a fan of
So,
green peas, so
all right.
green peas
So
in particular, like Jolly
the
Green Giant,
the thing with
not
yes,
not my
the
favorite.
thing with green peas is that I would rather buy the canned or frozen kind than the fresh kind, because when you buy green peas from the grocery store or from the farmer's market and they're fresh, is that you have to open the pods and one by one, take out all the little peas. It's a very time consuming endeavor. The way I look at it is information is the same thing. You have to realize that going to the grocery store and getting all the green peas in a fresh, I guess, format, the fresh kind, that's easy. But when you get home and you actually have to cook, and you realize that the time and effort that it takes to make those peas more actionable, more ready for cooking, that's quite the endeavor. And so when people note down things, maybe one way to establish a filter, like you said, is to think about how much time and effort is this actually going to take me versus how much do I really want it. So in this case, if I was a green peas addict or fan, like it's my favorite food, presumably I would actually be okay with getting 4 pounds of fresh green peas and taking the time to open the pods and prep them and cook them. But I'm not. I don't like green peas that much. And so I'd rather just not eat them at all. So that saves me a lot of time. Or if, it happens that one recipe does call for green peas, I would just get the frozen or the canned kind, because in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that important to me. So there's a ratio between how much time is this idea going to take you versus how badly do you actually want it.
Okay, that's really interesting, because it goes to what gets captured, right?
Yes.
So does she write down green peas, or does she write down canned green peas, pre-cooked green peas, raw green peas, and also does she write down 4 pounds of green peas or 2 cans of green peas? So when she even captures, she's actually committing to a particular block of time in her calendar, for example.
Yes.
But she's not necessarily wittingly doing so.
So that's a very important thing that you bring up, which is believe it or not, there's only research on this has started very recently in 2017, and it's called the opportunity cost of time. So when we talk about opportunity cost, usually we think about money. So if you
right,
money you have and spend it on a car, the opportunity cost is that you're not spending money on a house. So you're not going to be owning a house, you're going to be owning a car, and you have to be okay with that. The opportunity cost of time is something that we only started talking about very recently, because unlike money, it's not exchangeable one-to-one. So for instance, one could say, oh, well, if I'm spending time at work, or if I'm spending time with my kids, that's the opportunity cost is that I'm not making $100 an hour being at work. But that's
work like that.
Whereas the opportunity cost of time is, oh, I'm at work right now working on something that I'm okay with. But the big opportunity cost for me is that I'm not spending precious time with my kid who's growing up and whose childhood time is going to expire at some point. And I do want to spend time with him as a father figure. So that's very important to realize and to keep in mind as you're dealing with more and more information. To give you an example, there's a lot of books on time and the history of time, lots of articles that come out almost every week now. I do not have time to read all of them. So I will be very selective. There's one on how people thought about time around the 1st century in Greece and Palestine and the Roman Empire. That's super interesting. Now, there's another one on something that I'm already quite familiar with, I like, even though it would inform me a little better, the marginal outcome for me is very small
Hmm.
compared to reading the one on, hey, I found it fascinating. What did the the people in the Roman Empire, the way they thought about time? That's a lot more interesting to me because I don't know a lot about it. So the marginal outcome for me is much bigger.
Wow, that's interesting because I have the same problem. I used to, and I still collect almost every time management PDF I can find, academic research wise, and I have a store of it on my hard drive, right? But I had a similar problem also that some of these they seem kind of marginal, and I couldn't find the time. I'm not gonna find the time to read them. So do I store them on my hard drive? Well, no one again I've started to say maybe not, Maybe I don't need to have my hard drive filled with every single time management article that's ever been written since, and they're coming out so quickly now that maybe back to the green peas, maybe there's a sort of a wisening up, getting smarter about capturing that I need to get green peas, that over time you start to get more um, more accurate,
Hmm.
more nuanced.
Yes.
It's not just green peas, it's a particular kind of green peas, and the kind that you're choosing to capture actually is based on some prior commitments that you have.
Yes. Yes. It has to be aligned with, and by prior commitment, I assume that you mean some goal, well-defined goal that you have.
Like more time with my kids as
That's correct.
opposed to
Yeah.
cooking green peas.
Yes. Absolutely.
But that makes things, I was gonna say it makes them harder. but
It is
but
hard.
the truth is you're giving yourself the gift because you're getting back some of that opportunity cost, right? You're actually giving yourself more quality time by not just capturing everything in its raw form.
That's right. And I think we live in an
Oh,
era where,
hmm.
we're being told that you can have it all. No, we live in an era where you can have uh, less and less of it all because there's more and more stuff out there. Like you want to, I had a friend, a colleague, professor who,
Wow.
I think 6 years ago, he told me, he used to tell me, oh, I'm good now. I'm all caught up. I was like, what do you mean I'm all caught up? He said, well, there's this TV show and
Stop.
that TV, there's Breaking Bad, there's that show, there's that show, and they had new seasons. And he's like, okay, I'm all caught up. I made the time to watch them all. And he had this sense of urgency where if there's a new big TV show out there, he had to watch it. And just today on my social media, I shared this
Hmm.
graph where you see that around the year 2000, you had very few new TV shows per year around the year 2000. Now in
Okay.
2022 or 2023, you have more than 2,000 new TV shows, not even new seasons, it's new TV shows, 2,000 of them every single year. So in the year 2022, there's 2,000 new TV shows, which
You
is
can't watch all of
absolutely,
those.
yeah, absolutely impossible to watch them in a lifetime. Like you said earlier, if you wanted to watch all the existing TV shows, a lifetime would not be enough.
That I don't know where we're getting into solutions now, but so there's some kind of filtering that Karen needs to do, that we all need to do, because and the way you said it, boy, I don't know if you can quote it. Is that a fresh insight, or did you bring that one to the party? The one about we can't do it all, and in fact we're doing less of all because there's more all than there ever was before. Is that
That
you?
is such a fresh insight that I actually came up with it a minute ago. I'm not
That's
because
our third insight. That's been on a phone call. That's gonna be on an episode, by the way, because that one.
well, because I was
That
thinking, like people
my
do say, "Oh,
goodness.
you can't have it all, you can't have it all," or like I want
Yeah,
to have it all. That works in like a 1950s
yeah,
timeline where
yeah, yeah,
maybe there's a few new books every year, like maybe
yeah,
the three broadcast channels that are
yeah,
available have some new shows.
yeah.
Maybe you can do that. You can't have it all today, not because we can't, but because the all, so like everything that's out there,
Right.
has increased exponentially.
So you must choose to have less of all there is and not have that equate to failure.
I think the concept of sacrifice has become more important in the sense that you have to realize you have 24 hours in a day, the same 24 hours in a day that we've had since the, I guess, beginning of civilization. The difference is that now there's so many more things we can do at any point in time. It used to be that, you want to buy something in the store, you have to go to the store, and the store is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now it's open 24/7,
24/7.
365 days a year online. You don't even have to go to the store. And when you go online on Amazon, you don't have to choose like between one or the other toothbrush. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different models you can choose from. So,
You
yes,
can't buy each one and test it, can you?
exactly. So, I think people have to become more and more at peace with this idea of sacrifice. I only have 24 hours in a day. I better spend it on the few things that matter the most.
So it's a filter is a part of the solution, but there is a sort of an accepting that there will be sacrifice. There is by definition that you live in 2023, you must sacrifice. So
That's right. So just
this
to
is what
get
we're
back
getting
to
at
the
here.
filter, because I assume we're at a point where we can talk about solutions. Is that correct?
Yep.
So I think that a good way to think about it is a halfway point. So when you go from a point A to point B and you're on a train, sometimes you're at a halfway point. There's a point A and a half, or like some point I in the middle. I think the same thing can be extremely useful when we talk about information capture. So at point A, you capture a lot of information, and then at the end, the goal is to implement that information, or at least organize it, put it in your calendar, put it in your OneNote, doesn't matter. But in the in the middle, is there something that you can do to be to resist, or at least to mitigate the fact that we almost always over capture? And so the technique that I think is very useful here is you can have a repository where you capture almost everything that you think is important at the time, like in the heat of the moment. To make things even more, I guess, concrete, here's how I do it. I have this app called Google Keep, and
Yeah, I use it. I use it too. Yeah.
it's great. And it's great
Yep.
because it's instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to like open an app and then click on that button or this button. All I do is literally grab my phone and then be like, "Hey Google, note to self," and then I dictate my note. It works on my phone. It works on my home assistants. It works on my earbuds when I'm walking or
Oh, great.
biking.
I didn't
So
know that. Oh,
so it's a very integrated ecosystem where I can take notes from pretty much any
anywhere.
device that I own, whether I'm
Mhm.
cycling, walking, taking a bath, doing the dishes, doesn't matter. It's always there. Now, the barriers between me and saving an idea or a thought are very, very low. And that's what I want. I don't want
Oh,
anything to stand between me and a potential good idea. Now,
uh-huh.
that's what I do in the heat of the moment as things
Mm-hmm.
come up. What I also do is that every day when I finish work, I have a routine where I go through my Google Notes for the day. And so I look at them. And now, a few hours have passed by. I look at them with I guess, a new set of eyes.
Right.
And some of them I just delete because I'm like, oh, that sounded like a good idea, but it's
Right.
either impractical or not that important to me. And then the others are, turns out that they're actually quite insightful and very important to me. And then they have
Right.
to go somewhere else.
Right.
Google Note is just the halfway point. Now you have
Right.
to put them on a train to where they belong. So, for
Right.
instance, if one of the Google Notes was, oh, this is a great idea for a blog post, then that goes straight into my repository where I have a list of ideas for my blog
Right.
post. Or
Right.
the other one might be, oh, spend time with my partner, and go to a restaurant. So
Right.
what I'll do is just set a time on my calendar with that particular, I set this time,
Uh-huh.
place, restaurant, and so on. That's done. So there's always an endpoint. The endpoint is either my calendar, my could be my tasks, my OneNote. It doesn't really matter, but the endpoint is where the things start to be implemented.
Right.
For instance, a if it's scheduled on my calendar that I'm going with my wife to a restaurant, that will be done.
Right.
That's we're almost near that, because if something is on my calendar, it will be done.
Right.
Um, if it's on my list of blog posts, at some point, I will be writing a blog post about it, and that's where I create this great filter where, in the heat of the moment, I always want to note something down. Then around the end of the day, I can decide whether, okay, I apply this extra filter. Do I really need this? Is this really important?
And then based on what you said before, there's an idea of the input and the output.
Yes.
So almost like the yield. So the yield of are you concerned that the yield of your capturing, the transition from A to B, not the halfway point, but the A to the B, should we be concerned? Because it sounds as if we should be, that there's too much capture going on for the yield at the other end, that it's ineffective to capture 5,000 to do one task. That's somewhere in there's some ineffectiveness, and their effective capture is more balanced with the output to some degree. Somewhere in there's a tipping point.
So it's very interesting that you talk about yield, because I see this process as separating the wheat from the chaff. Or when you get
Signal
a lot
from
of wheat.
the
So
noise. No?
sorry.
Signal from the noise.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So and we all have ideas that we want to save or capture in the heat of the moment. That's great. I
Mhm.
think that should be encouraged. Um, but you need to have at some point like a halfway point where you separate the wheat from the chaff. And
Right.
and very often you're going to realize that maybe a third or maybe half or maybe more of the ideas were in hindsight either not useful, not practical, or just not of interest anymore.
Right. Right. So an effective halfway point would produce a great quality yield, so that everything that gets
Yeah.
through the filter, so to speak, or it gets through Google Keep into your calendar gets done. Because you
Yes.
did emphasize everything that gets placed in one of those implementation places gets done.
Yes. Absolutely.
Great.
And the
So that
halfway
that
point.
that part's faithful. The halfway point is just like a point of triage.
Exactly, and it helps you get at least maybe a few hours of let it cool down. So I don't know about Jamaica. I don't know. I'm
Let
not
it
sure
cool
about the
down.
U.S. But
Hmm.
in Canada, there's a law that if you want to divorce someone, you have to wait a year before between the time you announce it and the time you actually sign the papers. And the reason for that is
It's a
that
long time,
sometimes
Brad.
it is a long time. It's a very long time.
I've had one of those, and a year would have been painful. That's all I could say. A
So
year would have been.
yes, it is painful, but I assume that the logic behind it is that sometimes we make decisions in the heat of the moment that when you take time to cool down, you realize that, okay, maybe I don't want to get a divorce. Or very often what happens is that people, no, I'm like, yes, I'm very sure that I want to get a divorce even a year after. Um, so this halfway point works the same way. Like we have a lot of ideas that in the heat of the moment, we like and we think, okay, we're going to do this. But then a few hours later, we're like, oh, I'm not too sure about this. Or if you still are sure about it and you still think it's a great idea, that to me is a great indicator that should be done.
Right. So there's that time to consider. But if again, back to Karen, if your time to consider what you need to work on, the processing time, at some point, if you're spending 10 hours processing to determine that you only have one task to do, at some point, the opportunity cost. So of doing all of that capturing, and even considering the 10 hours of activities that you're going through, is it worth it? And I think the answer would be no, right? There's some point at which Karen could reduce the input and get the same output, in other words.
That's a very good question. And that's why I recommend doing the cleanup daily, because every day, unless you're an absolute genius, you're not going to have 100 ideas or 100 things to note down. Maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 10, and that's doable. Like if you take
Right.
5 minutes at the end of the workday, just 5 minutes to go through 10 ideas and ask yourself, do I keep this? And if I keep it, where should it go? Should it go in my calendar, my OneNote, my Notion? That should not take more than 5 minutes. And I think that 5 minutes is time very well spent. However, if you do find yourself having to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes doing that every day, to me, that's a clear indicator that, again, either you're an extreme genius or maybe you're compulsively noting down a lot of things that are of little value.
Right. And there are the probability of them somewhere you're at the bottom of the distribution, down in the tail, capturing all kinds of stuff just in case.
Yeah.
But the truth is you want to be near the fat part of the distribution, where the things you're capturing have a high probability of turning into the task. Not a low probability, which then takes all this time to process, which then has you be kind of compulsive and maybe even runs up your anxiety and gives you fear of missing out. Well, I've never had a conversation like this one before. Wow, okay. This is a good one. So, Brad, we gotta wrap it up, but we could keep going. I just want to be clear. There could be a part 2 to this very easily, but in the interest of our listeners, and they have opportunity costs as well. Brad, how can folks get a hold of you and the work that you do and enjoy more of your thinking?
So 3 times a week, I share new research and what it means for you in terms of tips to better manage your time. And I'm available on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. My name is Brad Aeon. That's Brad Aeon. And as much as I can, I try to translate scientific research into actionable tips.
And is it on Twitter? Is it at Brad Aeon?
That's correct.
Is that
Yes.
the handle? Great,
Yeah.
great. So I follow Brad on LinkedIn, and there's always something of value each week. I can promise you that. And there's nobody else doing the kind of research that he's doing that I'm even remotely aware of. Not even like 10% of the value that he produces in this area. So,
Thank you.
Brad, thanks so much again for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great. We're not finished, folks. There's going to be a little bit more information about our next episode, so keep listening. And here's an excerpt from our next episode with Ben Kirk.
So it's quite possible that they were just having their standard meetings, going around the table, doing the standard presentation, doing the standard reports, the standard briefings, and maybe they weren't opening it up for people to be open-minded for innovation, to give this guy, this inventor, a chance to really explain his invention. Maybe they were just doing the standard thing over and over and over again, which is this sort of story that we hear about meetings. You seem like, well, hang on, we did the same meeting 2 weeks ago. We were covered over the same things. And maybe that's what happened to Kodak. I mean, I guess we can only suppose.
And if you want to leave a comment about this episode or any aspect of the work that we're doing here at the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, you can go over to www.replytofrancis.info and send me either a message by text or send me a voice message, a voice note. And as you probably know, we have a couple of places that you can interact with other people, talk about this episode. One is at the community, mightytaskers.scheduleu.org, and you'll see the link in the show notes. And the other, of course, is our upcoming Task Management and Time Blocking Summit coming up in March. 2 outstanding opportunities to interact with other people about the ideas that you've heard on this podcast or any of our episodes that are coming up. And if you'd like to support the work we're doing, I invite you to click on the Patreon link below to make a donation. And please don't forget to like our show and recommend it to others on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, or whatever podcast app or service you're using. This is Francis Wade. I'm signing out. I hope to see you on a future episode. And until then, take care and all the best. See you later.